All right, we are back for episode 68 of Digital Divination. Jason, how you been? It's been two
Hey,
weeks.
John. It has been 2 weeks. I'm doing okay. How you doing, John?
Good, good, good. It's we recorded this typically on Sunday, and I'm a
Mhm.
big football fan, and both my college team, Michigan, won yesterday, and then the
Great.
Seahawks won today. So, it's a good day for me.
Great, great. Cool. Yeah.
What about you?
Um, I took a little mini vacation, actually, because, when we're recording this, the air, here in the sort
Oh,
of east side
mhm,
of Seattle and Seattle area
mhm.
was not great. My wife and I decided to just sort of, like, drive up north a little bit where it was a little better. So we went up to Bellingham.
Wow. I
Yeah.
wish you would have told me you were going because this is one of the weekends our house in Camino was wide open and nobody was there, and the air is
Uh,
really good there. So,
well,
you could have
yeah, well, fair
hung out
enough.
there.
Next time. There's actually a couple
Yeah,
we know someone, who's up there in
okay.
Bellingham, and we had a couple restaurant recommendations, and so
Yeah,
we wanted to try some of that stuff out, yeah.
nice. So, did you go someplace in Bellingham or someplace along the way?
We went in Bellingham, we stayed in Bellingham at a, motel kind of area, pet-friendly motel, that, looked like it's been around for a while, but it only really got converted it to be a little more modern looking than a regular motel.
Mhm.
And it's very nice. We got a big old box of vegan donuts, pastries, really. The next morning, we went to a couple restaurants, got some great sandwiches and other foods, and had a couple beers over the course of the couple days we're there. We came back yesterday, of course, into when it was like the worst.
Oh,
Yesterday
yeah.
afternoon, when it was practically Mordor here on the east
Mhm,
side,
mhm.
and so then we locked ourselves in
Yep,
back, and
yeah.
and and I left something at the motel, if you can believe it.
Oh, was it important?
It's my pillow cube. So, a sort of
Yeah, that is
nicer
important.
pillow. It's nice. They're
Yeah,
not cheap, so we're
yeah,
gonna try to figure
yeah,
out how to get that mailed to us. I
yeah.
feel like
Wow.
we were pulling into Redmond when, we got the call, like, "Oh, I think you left something." I'm like, What could we have left? Oh, it was this foam cube." I'm like, "Foam cube? Oh, shoot. My pillow, my cube, my square." Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you guys vegan?
Well, my wife is, and I'm vegetarian,
Uh,
but for the most part,
okay.
I'm like I would say 90% vegan because she does a lot of the
Yeah,
cooking and we eat out
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot. But every once in a while, I'll get a pizza with real cheese on it. But that's about it.
Right. Yeah, now my daughter is vegan, and so when she
Mm,
comes to stay with us, we end up eating vegan, and, like, all
yeah,
summer, she was here
cool.
off and on, so we had a lot of vegan, and, even when
Yeah,
we go out someplace, there has to be vegan options, and then we'll get
sure.
something a little bit different. But I've come to appreciate vegan food, it can be quite good even if you're used
Y-
to, like, real cheese and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. And I mean, like they've made incredible like scientific strides actually, and like
Yeah,
making
yeah,
cheese that tastes kind of like real cheese and all that Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat.
right.
I love the Impossible Whopper.
Really?
It's so good.
I've never had it.
Try it out, it's pretty good. I feel like,
Yeah,
I hear people, order it who aren't necessarily vegetarian or vegan, they just get it because it's tastes pretty good too, so,
yeah.
yeah.
I'll have to try
Sells
that.
well.
Yeah, we actually we got some Impossible Burgers at
Mhm.
Safeway for my daughter. She actually doesn't like those. She doesn't like the
Oh, okay.
imitation meat. She'd
Alright,
rather
fair
have
enough.
like a bean and whatever kind of patty
Yeah, well,
made up,
yeah, those can be good too,
one of
yeah.
those. So, but she does a lot. She's been doing a lot of like curried stuff. She'll have it with
Mhm,
us, stir
mhm,
frying things,
yeah.
and it's like, wow, she's cooking and it tastes good. So it's a kind of
Exactly.
a win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so I was thinking about what we should talk about today,
Mhm.
and this is a very kind of formal thing I do here, where I spend 2 minutes before we start recording thinking about what we talked about last time. In this case, we talked about developing entire adventure paths,
Right.
and I try to come up with a topic for this time that I can get you to discuss in detail. And I'm thinking this time we can look at writing adventures. Is there an adventure you've written lately that you could kinda talk about that process?
Yeah, I mean, I've written a few, there's some Pathfinder ones that aren't quite out yet. But I would think we could talk about Junker's Delight, the first standalone
Yeah.
Starfinder adventure module, because not only did I write that, but I kind of had a lot of behind the scenes planning of it.
Hmm.
So we can kind of talk about it from both sides of the point of view. Because um, when you get an assignment to write something, you usually get an outline and you
Right.
fill in the blanks here and there. So it's like it's writing to spec, right? It's which is a different thing than kind of just going wild and writing whatever you want. I mean, you get there's always leeway. I almost said latway. That's not a word. Leeway and
Latitude or
freedom.
leeway. Yeah.
Latitude. That's what it was. Latitude and leeway.
Yeah.
You get a lot of freedom. Sometimes go from point A to point B and figure out how to do that. But the
Hmm.
Junker's Delight was sort of concepted by me, and then I think I outlined it and assigned it to myself to write.
Well, before we jump into that part,
Yeah.
can you tell me a little bit about the why these standalone adventures were created? Those are new things
Well,
too.
yeah, they're fairly new. It was sort of we were looking at the schedules, I believe, and it was at the point where we were going to um, cut back on the adventure
Right.
path to back to bi-monthly because we were producing a lot of content that wasn't getting played or more importantly bought. And so people say, "Oh, it's a little too much." And even though that those Starfinder adventure paths are shorter and people can kind of blaze through them, um, people weren't. So we decided to cut back. But we also wanted to continue to produce stuff that maybe people would get buy about, and
Mhm.
people are getting into a whole adventure path, even if there were 3 volumes. And at that point, we were still doing 6 volume adventure paths, obviously.
Right.
It's a
Right.
commitment, but a module is less of a commitment. It can take, it's meant to be more than a night's play, or a society scenarios worth of play, but less
Mhm.
than an adventure path. And people, I think, were kind of clamoring for when are we going to get standalone adventures? When are we gonna get those?
Right.
And so we sort of, we're pulling back on the adventure paths. We have the time to do standalones, and we'll put out a couple of those. And to begin with, it was all sort of talked about what it would be. It would have to be a first level adventure, the first one, and make it so that it was a way that people could grab people who weren't playing yet, and
Mhm.
be
Mhm.
a gateway into all the other stuff that wasn't quite. It was more than the beginner box, but
Yeah.
not quite. Something else. And so
You said
basically, yeah.
gateway, and it just makes me, I'm thinking gateway drugs, and so this is,
Yes.
gateway RPG. Suck them in.
Exactly. Suck them in. Well, and then we talked about it back and forth about how it would work. It was like, oh, well, it's going to be first time GMs and first time players.
Right.
Let's make it so that whatever's in here, whatever's in this book, all you need is the core Starfinder rule book
Right.
and this book and nothing else. We said, don't need any alien archives like you do with Adventure Paths.
Mhm. Mhm.
You don't need to have to get into the society stuff, which can be intimidating because there's certain ways you make characters, and then you've got to find people, and maybe you don't. Well, you wanna, a lot of people see it as like, oh, I've got to go and play with strangers. You can play society adventures on your own with your own group, and then report them for the stuff, of course. But
Right.
I feel like that's not the selling point for those scenarios,
Mhm.
really. And so I was like, oh yeah, yeah, and something that an adventure standalone adventure that could be just sort of constantly on the shelf. It doesn't get outdated. It's a well,
Right.
it's called an evergreen product that can be just sold alongside stuff. And I was like, yes. And selfishly, I wanted to have my name on the cover. So I said, oh, I'd love to have my name on the cover, and I'll work on that. We can talk about what it is, and me and I believe Jake and Barry at the time, bounced around a couple of ideas what it would be and what it could be. There was a several ideas sort of floating around. One that sort of took more place on Absalom Station, which also but was very semi similar because there's a place as a level in Absalom Station. It's called like Bot Scrap,
Oh
and it
yeah.
would have been
Yeah. Yeah.
about like junk. And I was like, oh,
Right.
junk is fun. We need a kind of a junk. I don't know. We just wanted to do. I wanted to do something with junk, and it kind of got stuck in my mind. And we plotted this out, and I decided, oh, well, think about what kind of things you might encounter and what kind of a plot it would be, and that's where Joker's Delight kind of came from, without getting into the specifics of each of the beats. At the time, too, but while I was selfishly, I wanted it to have my name on the cover. I wanted to also kind of reach out to someone else who maybe hadn't written much and help share the credit. And maybe originally I thought maybe it would be an idea that where like two people would write it, like myself, and I would be shepherding someone else who hadn't done much. And I heard a lot of great things about Misha Bushyager from the Pathfinder side of things. So I reached out to her. I'm like, "How do you want to do this? Would you like
Mhm.
to participate in this?" And she didn't have enough time to kind of sit down and collaborate on the entire adventure. So I was like, "Oh, what about if you just wrote some of the back matter, and we can, have our names on the cover?" She was amenable to that. So she ended up writing the sort of gazetteer that's in the back that ends up
Mhm.
being about the city. Um, to sort of go back, I remember that I had um, a bit of back in the day, back in the writing, developing the Packed Worlds hardcover, the Akaton 8 pages or whatever it was ended up
Mhm.
being a little short during copy fit, so it had to get filled out with some text. And I actually ended up adding the text that is about Kefek Depot, which is the
Mm.
junk
Mhm.
tourism area that is
Right.
the sort of basis of Junker's Delight. So this is all kind of generating from my own ideas. And I thought that name was kind of funny because it would be like calling a place Cockroach Town.
Right. Because
Because Kefek,
Skeffix are these vermin, not or
yeah,
critters that tear things apart and stuff. Yeah.
they're 100% vermin, and they love to
Yeah.
eat junk, and so it's like they're
Yeah.
like cross between roaches and billy goats, I guess.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, but they look like bugs. They have a very
Yeah.
bug-like look. Oh, they're funny. Oh, let's do that. Quebec Depot's a thing that's junk tourism. I want to go there. I want to explore a little bit more. I want to talk about this idea of junk tourism,
Right.
and then what basically plot is basically something gets found in the junk. It becomes like an archaeological thing that gets something. Obviously, there's a MacGuffin of some kind gets discovered,
Mhm.
and then the pieces have to go retrieve it or protect it, and so forth and so on. So that's the sort of core, the kernel that this blossomed out of. Essentially, the title is, of course, a very thinly, well, not, well, I guess not. People don't know this, so that it's a reference to Rapper's Delight, which
Yeah.
I was
That was
thinking about at the
kind of my
time.
guess. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I don't it doesn't mean any it doesn't have any relationship to the adventure at
Yeah.
all, but,
Yeah.
um, I liked it, and everyone was like, "Yeah, it's great."
Yeah.
And, it's another one of those things. I think I may have talked about this to you. A thing I got away with, basically,
Yeah.
when you're in kind of at Paizo for as long as I had been at that point too, you kinda can get away with stuff. You can kinda, like, put stuff in there that is, you know not necessarily like Easter eggs to that was the because it's not about anything about rapping or singing or
Right.
whatever, right? So,
Right.
but it's not, but it's just sort of a cheeky nod more than anything.
Yeah. No, I like that.
I
So,
think partially
in
partially it came from because the other idea was called I was going to call it Bot Scrap Blitz, uh,
oh, yeah,
which
that
is a
would have been
reference to
good.
Ballroom
Yeah.
Blitz.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had songs in my head, and I was just thinking
Yeah.
that's where it came from.
Nice. So, th this adventure was one you mentioned that you kinda knew what you wanted to do,
Hmm.
and what w so Jake was the developer on it, Jason Tondra.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, did he still provide an outline, or did he just kinda turn it, "Hey, you know what you're doing, just do that."
If I recall, I kind of wrote up an outline and gave it to Jake and just be
Okay.
like, "Jake, does this look like something you want to develop?" And he's like, "Yo, of course, I trust you." And maybe I think we had some back. We as we often do when we outline stuff, we talk about the minutia if there's a problem. I don't know where to go from here. We talk, Jake and I would talk about that kind of
Right.
thing. So everyone kind of knew where it was going and what it was about. But I feel like I penned most of the outline.
Mhm. Okay. So that was good because then you kinda
Yeah,
knew you already had some idea where it was gonna go all the way through.
yeah.
Now, with the standalone adventure, just the adventure part, how many words is that? Just for so I know comparison to other things.
Yeah, let me think. It's a little more than um um adventure path adventure, which is about
Okay.
25,000 words. This was ended up being about 35, I think.
Okay.
I'm gonna say
So it's a
35.
pretty big chunk, and then
Yeah.
back matter, like another 10,000 words or more than that?
Yeah, around about there. The adventure, and then there's some stuff in there. There's some other rule stuff and
Right.
monsters, new
Right.
monsters that I wrote for it too. That ended up another couple thousand. But yeah the entirety of the Batman at 10,000. The Gazetteer probably around seven.
Mhm. Mhm.
Almost
Yeah, so I was gonna play that, then something happened and I couldn't go through it with the team that was doing that. I ended up playing the Locust one that
right. The next
came
one.
after that one. But I remember there's like a player's guide up
Hmm.
front for that, and there was also, a subclass of Technomancer in there as well.
Yes.
Is that something you
A
designed or
prestige class. Yes, it was, and, it actually, there's a little bit of a we had a little cross-contamination between, the us and the hardcover, or parallel thinking, I guess, for lack of a better word, is that, there's a basically I think it's also an archetype, a Junkmancer archetype in or Tech Revolution, maybe? Whichever one of those came first. Tech Revolution, I
I
think.
th I think Tech Revolution, I don't remember it in Galactic Man.
Yeah. One of those 2 also has a junk-based type, and they kind of, aren't the same thing, which is
Mhm,
interesting, and I'm curious to know which one,
mhm,
if anyone, has tried to, like, smash them together into single character.
mhm, mhm.
I'm just
Alri
remembering something, John.
Yeah, go
This
ahead.
makes this actually a very, germane topic of conversation
Okay.
because, early last week, a NASA, engineer tweeted out that, she was trying out Starfinder for the first and she was had a beginner box and the core rule book, and
Yeah.
poking out behind that beginner box was Junker's Delight. And I was like, "Yeah, all right, there it is." And I was like, "Yeah, I wrote that." She gave me a thumbs up for that. And then I got a
Nice.
couple of people talking about Junker's Delight, telling me they watched it and that.
That is very cool. That
Yeah.
is really did you
So I
offer
hope
to
that
run it for
I
her?
think she was the one running it. She was in the
Oh,
process of
okay.
GMing, for
Yeah,
people or
yeah,
prepping to GM for it.
yeah.
And it's great because it's the thing that is for first time GMs, right?
Yep.
For
Oh,
Starfinder, you could
awesome.
be now. Don't get me wrong. The game, the book. If you know Starfinder and you know how to run games, you can also run this. It's all there and good. Or if you
Right,
run other games and you're new to Starfinder, this is also a gateway. But
right. Right, so you helped develop this outline,
mhm.
right? So you have the outline. How long does the outline run, and kind of what's that look like when you write it up or it's provided for you?
The outline. Uh, one of these outlines. They're always feel like when you're making them, they always feel like they're too long.
Mhm,
Because it's like a lot of words and oh my god, what am I doing? But you're providing someone with a guideline to write several thousand more words than that. So I think it should be comprehensive. But it's
mhm,
just a general sort of like, this XP we're gonna it gets you from. We should break this up into these many chapters, and then each chapter is actually a level. So you make sure that each of these chapters gives enough XP to advance to the next level, and how that's going to break down. At the time, I think I was probably picking out, starting to think about encounters. So the outline might have
right,
had a couple. Use this monster, use these monsters, and then just sort of like, probably at that point too in the outline I came up with like names of NPCs and bad guys, the main bad guys,
mhm,
and that kind of stuff. But there's not much. I say all of these adventure outlines basically kind of look the same. It's a list of numbers of like XPs and treasure, and then due dates and stuff like that, and then just sort of like summaries of each individual part, not necessarily encounter by encounter. That's sort of what we leave to the
mhm,
author. In this case, I might have already drawn up encounter by encounter,
right,
just because I knew what I was going to be doing. And so, there's that. And then just sort of like, here's all the background stuff that,
right, right,
for what are the bad guys up to? What is the MacGuffin and why do people want it? Et cetera, et cetera. History, a little bit of history of uh,
right,
Akaton in there because of it has to deal with, the Thastron crash when
mhm,
their sort of rocket fuel that,
right,
became less useful once the drift drives started becoming more
right,
ubiquitous.
right. So, I'm gonna ask you a couple more specific things. Now, I've
Sure, yeah,
written,
yeah.
some adventure stuff, so I kinda know the answer, but I think this is important. So you break it into a couple of subsections or chapters, so an
Mhm.
AP book has 3 chapters. So imagine, Junker's Delight, I don't again
I think it
recall
I
the
think it I
adventure,
think it ended up
has
having 3
3 or
chapters, yeah.
4. Yeah, so
Yeah, it's
and
just
then
3.
f within each chapter, you're probably, the outline probably tells you, we wanna have maybe 2 or 3 encounters and maybe a skill challenge. Is that given in the
It
outline, or is it just this is how much XP you need and you should split it up amongst skill based and counter based?
it doesn't get specific into saying this should be a skill challenge, this should be a fight or
Yeah.
whatever. So it might be like a thing where you get to a large end encounter that you don't necessarily want to always fight, but maybe the PCs can provide a way for
Right.
the PCs to be able to talk their way around this or talk their way to an easier fight or something like that.
Mhm.
When you want that to when that's important to the feel of the adventure.
Mhm. Mhm.
So oftentimes we just from the outlines point of view we give the authors the leeway that they can sort of decide things on a map, for instance. Oh, these, you've got to
Mhm.
go from point A to point B. What's in the way? It doesn't really matter as long as you give out, a couple thousand XP.
Okay. So, but you give out XP. You tell them
Yes,
how much
yes,
XP. So I'm just wondering what the guidance was. That's all.
yeah.
All right. So,
Normally, in an AP, we just say this begins at this level and ends at this level. Give out this many XP. For Junker's Delight,
right,
we were like, each chapter should give out this much XP because
right, right, right.
we were looking at the way that the Pathfinder APs were doing it, and that's what because
Hmm.
when
Hmm.
Pathfinder Second Edition, it's easier to do. Like 1,000 is a chunk of XP, where it's a little more wibbly wobbly
Right.
for Starfinder. But in this case, I want to be easier for new GMs to be like, at the end of each chapter, you're gonna level up your players, right? And then
Hmm.
so that had to get a little more rigid, but most of the time it's just sort of as long as you have it from the beginning to the end, you're getting 2 levels worth of XP.
Right. So, given that this sort of outline, so presume that you were given this outline. How do you approach that then as a writer? You
Mm.
start with the very end and how am I going to get there? Do you start with flushing out NPCs, encounters, start at the beginning? What's that process look like for you? And
I
what did
for
it look like
me,
for you in this book?
yeah, for me, I often just because the first thing you do get asked to do is to write an encounter by encounter. How are you going to give out all this XP? And that's
Right.
encounter by encounter, skill encounter, whether it's fight or whatever,
Mhm.
or where the story based stuff is coming in. So you draw up a more detailed outline that goes to beat by beat. And I think I did something like that so I could give it to Jake and be like, "This is what it's going to look like." Right now, can we? I'll go back and run with it. When I'm doing that, I do kind of go from start to finish. I don't. I want to know. I know where I need to get through from the main outline. I know where the end is, so I don't have to really worry about how that. I just have to figure out okay, what's interesting. What are the interesting beats between the beginning and the end? Um, for Junker's Delight, it is essentially like, okay, there's someone who needs to be rescued in the junk. Go through the junk, rescue them, bring them back. They tell you that they have a lead on some bigger treasure deeper into the junk. That's part two is getting to that, and that was the part where I wanted to have. Oh, well, there's other beings living in the junk. There's goblins. There's Sakeshtis. Let's have a little bit. How do you work together? The two factions essentially to get to essentially how the main this sort of crash spaceship, which might have some different engine in it, right? And then part three was clearing out, spaceship dungeon crawl, basically clearing it out.
Right.
And then I threw a little sort of uh, thing at the end where the sort of gang leader who's actually been chasing this thing at the same time is coming after you. So you get to use the starship as a kind of a Home Alone style. You can set up traps so as
Okay.
the
Right.
baddies kind of come at you in waves, they get beat up a little bit from the traps and make the final fight a little when you defeat the main boss leader. And then you've got the ship, it's yours. You can clean it up, and that's sort of like where do you go after this adventure is over. I guess that was a big thing that we wanted to include in this very first standalone adventure was not to include starship combat because it's a whole extra system that gets tacked on. So this is all on the ground. It's all sort of basic, investigations and fights and skill challenges and that sort of thing. With little make sure things here and there because there's one point where there's some radiation. How do you deal with radiation? Here's the sidebars. There's radiation. Here's another thing that's like, maybe it's poisons or other things. I'm gonna look through it now. Memory is a little fuzzy on it all. Leveling it up and what to do when your players are like, I have a better idea than the adventure. Uh,
Right.
uh
Nice. So given the outline, you start fleshing all your encounters all the way through, get all
yeah,
those lined out. You provide that outline then to the dev
yeah.
for, for them to say, okay, this works. Maybe this is too heavy here. Maybe
Mhm,
whatever they do. Right. We can talk about
yeah.
it later. After you get that check off, what do you do next?
Well, then I start writing. Right, you get that. It's all good. Maybe a tweak. Oh, I got to change this from the notes or whatever. Tweak that first. Then I set to writing. I always sort of start with the adventure background stuff first. And a lot of that is kind of in the outline. I'm kind of writing that a little bit here and there to where it makes sense. I have come to understand, really, really feel that uh, how adventures need to be presented is that the GM needs to know as much as possible up front
Hmm.
so that they are not taken by like any villain motivation isn't at the end of the adventure. That's a
Right.
book when you're reading it that when
Yeah.
you as a whoever's the audience of an adventure, the actual text of the adventure is the GM. So not the players. The players are being told this story through the GM essentially. So the GM can't be finding this stuff out at the same time a player would.
Hmm. And
It's
that's
a sort of
usually like maybe a half page or a page that
exactly.
describes a summary of the whole thing. Right.
Right.
Okay.
What happened in the past, who the main players are essentially, what they're doing, what their motivations are, maybe. Where if there's any important history about the place you are at, um, all that stuff is sort of presented up front. And then just get going. I tend to write kind of sequentially.
Hmm.
Um, I it's just easier for me to think of what happens next, what happens next, what happens next. If there is a point where something is sticking or writer's block, I can skip. Something happens here, skip this part, and then move on and come back to it. Oftentimes, though, you find that um, you get to maybe the end and you've hit your word count, but you have to still write chunks of.
Right.
I kind of try
Right.
to avoid that, so I know what I'm doing. Like when I'm writing, if I devote um, this one too, Junker's Delight had to basically be separate. Like there was a certain word count for each chapter, not certain,
Hmm.
so they could fit basically nice and neatly onto. Oftentimes you'll see an adventure path. Part two will start maybe in the middle of a page or something like that.
Right.
But
Right.
in
Right.
this case, these parts had to start on their own because I think we had like nice big pieces of art that we wanted to do after.
Hmm.
Sure, filling. Um, not quite, but oh, this one actually didn't actually do that. Any now that I look at it, it doesn't actually do that. But it was something we were trying to do.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so while I'm writing, I'm keeping track of like how much I've got left, and which I think is a bit. Um, for me, yeah, kind of
Yeah.
got a
So,
question.
well, yeah. Again, I'm trying to look at your process, and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm trying to elicit some things here. So you start at the beginning, right? So
mhm,
you have some introduction for the players, so they kind of know where they're
yeah,
at and where they're going, and they kind of get things started. Then you kind of probably have some chapter end point that's going to transition to the next point. So you're
yeah.
just writing to get to that point and kind of
Essentially,
linking the different counters for that.
yeah. Yeah. I have my detailed outline. I think for Junker's Delight 2, there was you said there's a little bit of a player's guide, so I may have
Hmm.
started with a little bit of that first, right? Because that is important to the players after I've gotten the sort of main introduction to the adventure down. So now think of some reasons why the players are there. Okay, then we
Hmm.
start off with that introduction, and then head back into the adventure proper. Um, Probably thinking a little bit about any of those new creatures that I already wanted to have in
Hmm.
here. I wanted to do a junk golem, have one yet,
Hmm.
and throw that in there where that's going to be, and kind of like plotting it out. When it comes to like things that have maps, I
Hmm.
kind of sketch. Again, I do some maybe some rough sketches, but a lot of it is often um, in my head. This is probably I'm gonna say a lot of this is not sort of like don't do as I say, not as I do. Sometimes writing advice. It probably helps a lot of people to have a detailed sketch of the area, so you know that this. But for me, oftentimes there might be a place where like, oh, I need an extra couple hundred words here. I need to just sort of create a new room off to the
Mm.
side. Maybe I'll put some treasure in there or space or whatever. And so that then I have to like mentally adjust my map. For me, I just despise drawing maps. Well, I only want to
Yeah,
do it once at the end.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you're making these connections, and sometimes in there, the connection's gonna involve an NPC that they have to meet
Yeah.
or encounter or something like
Yeah.
that, or a baddie. Um, do you flesh them out at that time, or you say, "Here's a placeholder for an NPC I need to flesh out later," or particular if there's a specific villain, sub-villain,
Right. Yeah.
do you stat him out then, or do you do it later?
Um, oh, the stat blocks. Stat blocks I generally kind of write as I go as well, just sort
Mhm.
of like just to and that is always the one of the more frustrating bits because you spend hours on the numbers and then you find you've
Right.
only written like 300 words and you're like, "Oh, I needed to do
Mhm.
1,000 words today. Oh no." But NPCs I like to I tell you, John, I think a lot of my writing process I do while I'm trying to sleep. I
Okay.
think about this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think maybe some other people would agree with me that like 75% of writing is thinking about the
yeah,
thing you're
yeah,
going
yeah.
to write. Get all these sentences in my head and I line them up and I just kind of imagine things and maybe like voices. Like we talk about the first NPC that you meet in Junker's Delight is a Yusuke named Riddle who owns a junk tourism shop, and she's getting the crap beat out of her by some gang members, right? And that's the sort of like whether or not you're there to talk to her or not. You kind of the PCs kind of stumble on this, and sort of like hell, and then they basically like it's not a asking. It's not about like do you help. It's more like they're beating her up, and then they notice you and like you can't be watching this, and then they go to beat you up, and of course PCs are going to win, and then they chase off the baddies, and I wanted to get like her voice in my head. I thought about
Mhm,
her, just sort of how she would talk and a sympathetic and hopefully fun character for GMs to portray, so that the PCs will want to help her. And of course, it doesn't hurt that she's offering money, and
mhm,
she's on hard times because the gang has driven off all of her other junk tourist guides, and she has this essentially this whale of a client who's lost out in the scrap yards, and
mm,
so it's oh god, and the gang the gangs like junk tourism's our business, trying to run her out of town,
mhm,
and hopefully creating someone who's again sort of someone you want to basically agree to do a favor for a very dangerous favor for. Essentially, that's all adventuring is.
mhm. Alright, so, again, I'm kinda walking through process there and a couple other things. You mentioned treasure.
Mhm.
How do you decide what to give? Now, in terms of for each section and for XP, I can I can figure that the amount of treasure
Yeah.
amount you should give. How do you figure out what to give the NPCs? What you wanna do? Is it just thematically relevant, or you wanna create a new thing, or what is it?
Some of it's thematic relevant, some of it's creating new stuff. I'll be honest with you. I think I leave treasure till like the very end.
Okay.
Uh, I run a bunch, and then I have like spots where it's just I kind of know. Oh, this is kind of a weird supply closet or an area there might be some treasure.
Mhm,
And I'll make sure that there's a note in there for me to look at later. But then I go back and I start thinking about like, well, what's fun, what's interesting, what do they need, what are the pieces going to need? They're going to need better weapons, better armor, first of all,
mhm,
right? So start there and throw those in there first, and then kind of like add it up as I go along. And go, well, I'm over. I got to take out one of these guns, or I'm under. I need to throw in an extra dozen grenades somewhere, and I'll just sort of pop a big chunk down. Or when I get to a point where I'm like, none of this is thematic, none of it's appropriate. There's nothing good. There's no good treasure of this level, no good, gear of this level. Oh,
mhm,
they find a credit stick. It's got some money on it. That's good enough. And they can spend it on what they want because these groups are very different. People are going to want to have different types of weapons, and the stuff that they find is not necessarily going to be. suitable
Right.
to them that they want to use because they're a soldier who really focuses on laser weapons or whatever, and you haven't put any laser weapons in there. Well, give them some money. That'll go a
Right.
long way.
Yeah, I think that's a nice mix. Introduce something kinda cool that maybe everybody could use or is especially needed in the adventure, then
Yeah.
having some credits that they can spend. Alright, so now we've gotten kind of through each of these sections here, kinda linking together. How do you make the final boss, right? There's always a final boss, right? You gotta have a final boss,
Yes. Gotta have a final
right?
boss.
How do you make that, kinda climactic and exciting, but not too overpowering for your group of beginning players here?
It's always those final boss fights are always tricky because you want to not have someone who comes out of nowhere. I mean, you can have the final boss fight be you get to a place and it's a creature that's there and you have to fight it and it appears and whatever.
Mhm,
More interestingly, it's someone who's you're working against kind of the entire adventure. And that's
right,
where the sort of boss leader comes in. You kind of hear about the person
mhm,
here and there. You might fight their lieutenants or whatever and get some sort of color in there to know what you might be going up against. Uh, but for the most part, you kind of keep them in the shadows. You got to keep them off the bat because often in these types of games, at any rate, the moment you put someone on the screen, you have to be prepared for them to die.
right,
Just because PCs will, groups will just sort of unless there's something really, really sort of stopping them from having a fight right then and there,
mhm,
they might have that fight right then and there, and you gotta make sure that it's either there's built-in ways for them to get on out of there so they can have the final boss fight at the very end, or it's just so you'd never well, it's a clone or whatever. That's the good stuff for that's sort of just good advice for like when you're running a game of your own creation
right,
too. If there's anybody who don't want to die right away, um, to kind of keep them out of away from the PCs for a little bit,
mhm,
or have those contingency plans. Um, math, whether or not it's too tough of a fight, math wise, we just sort of rely on that CR system to be good. But you want it to be someone to be challenging. You want it to be someone who has at least some minions with them, so they're not by
mhm,
themselves. There's that sort of action economy stuff that you have to deal with. So you've got to make them slightly more powerful than the PCs, but not overpower the PC, so you can actually throw some other, let's say lower
right.
level mooks in there, and have a hopefully an interesting fight. Um, the boss guy, is a show bad gang leader, basically sort of a
No,
real kind of
don't spill it all. I guess I'm gonna have to put spoiler
he's
tags all over this,
nice
so
spoiler tags. Well,
yeah,
I might be you might know who he's a show bad somewhere
okay,
earlier. Um,
yeah,
but it's Akaton. He's a big tough
yeah,
guy, but
yeah,
and it's kind of a surprise to me as it sort of came out as I was writing it and as we got the stuff from Misha. Kefak Depot is a mobbed up town in a lot of ways. It feels
okay,
like there's some stuff in there that makes it feel a little bit like Vegas in the
mm,
old Bugsy Malone days.
mhm,
Um, and this mob, this gang leader, essentially is the one. So I'm new. We're new in town. We're new, but I'm going to come in here. And I'm going to run this place, and he wants to run the whole town. Which is why he wants to get the big sort of MacGuffin, which will most likely allow him to sail and get a bunch of money and stuff. So. And why he decides to come after the PCs at the end, without sending sending his lieutenants and his goons and whatnot, but then finally just sort of like get out, the usuals. I'll take care of this myself.
right.
Coming in and probably getting obliterated.
So, just a couple of process things, and you've kind of alluded to this a little bit. Uh, how much do you target writing a day when you're writing?
I look at how long it'll take me to write something
Mm,
if I write 1,000 words a day,
okay, okay,
uh, and making sure that's enough time. If I have to
mhm,
write more than that, if because the deadline's shorter, I'll start to panic probably.
mhm,
Because 1,000 words a day is doable, but that's like every day, and
right,
that can be quite exhausting. So
mm,
it ends up being like Well, if I budget for 1,000 words a day and don't hit, that usually ends up a week or 2 before the actual deadline,
Right.
if you're not
Right.
sort of in a time crunch. So that gives me
Mhm.
the chance to be like, "Okay, I can't I'm running a game. I've worked all day and I'm running a game at night. There's no way after that game I'm not gonna be able to write 1,000 words." Okay, that's
Right.
fine. I can write a extra, 100 words every other day, make up for it. But then I don't also, I try not to beat myself up about those deadlines because I don't
Mhm.
want to get stressed about it. The more stressed you get about the deadline, for me anyway, the harder it is to continue writing.
Mm.
Um, but on the weekends, I can generally write more than that a day. I can get
Right.
through
Right.
if I've got a good head of steam. I can get through 1,000 words in about 2 hours.
Right. 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 Yeah, I'm just kinda curious. Like, this is my
Yeah,
own process. I'm trying to get
sure.
some
So,
comparison. I'd
what
like to
does your sort of deadline
w well,
situation look like
you
usually?
had mentioned thinking a lot, and so
Well, yeah,
for me, I oftentimes will think, say I got, a month for the first milestone and then, another month to for the final deliverable. I might just write a little bit in the first 2 weeks as I'm thinking
yeah,
about it, and then I'll crank it out in 10 days,
okay,
and
yeah,
then
yeah,
I'll do edits for until the milestone. Um, and the same thing with the finish, I'll get whatever feedback, and I'll think about it, and then I'll just get really going at it for 2 weeks, and I'll write through a whole weekend. I'm pretty good at writing Saturday and Sunday.
hmm
I can I can do 5 or 6,000 words in 2 days pretty easily. I mean, I could do
yeah. It's great.
5,000 words in a day if I have the whole day.
Yeah, I
It's not
try like
great, I have to edit
yeah,
it,
I don't
but,
yeah, you got
yeah,
yeah, it can be tough to do that, to
yeah.
feel, not have that sort of, like, writing hangover when you're done,
Well, see,
and come up
I
out of the
do ac
fugue and you're like, "Oh."
see, I do academic writing, and our papers are
Mhm.
way longer, and
Fair
I'm
enough, yeah.
used to having to do lots of writing. So when I write for this stuff, which I consider as fun, so like I got an assignment from somebody, and it was like, here's the milestone if you can meet it in whatever,
Mhm.
3 weeks. I turned in the final deliverable. I turned in everything, all the words and everything. And when they got it, they said, "Oh, this is good. Um, you're done."
You're good, yeah,
Basically, I
yeah.
didn't have to, because I had gone through, but I got so excited, and
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
for
yeah.
me is I need to get that level of excitement, whatever it is. Now, sometimes I have things I had to. We have this thing upcoming. I had to do lots and lots of stuff related for different areas, and so that became very tedious. And so I would skip around a lot, basically, rather than
Sure,
go
sure,
straight
yeah.
through. I'd work a bunch on here, work a bunch on here, work a bunch on here, so I could get excited about particular parts. But
Mhm.
if I'm not
Oh, yeah.
excited, then I don't feel like writing. So I could not do 1,000 words a day every day, 'cause some days I just don't feel like writing, you know?
No, yeah, and that's I mean,
Yeah,
that's just to say to everyone out there, that's fine. If you don't feel like writing all
yeah,
day, that's fine. Just sort of yeah, basically give your as I say, to give yourself enough time to be done early, that when you don't feel like
right,
writing, you won't end up being late.
right.
For push the deadline here and there.
Yeah, because of all the time I spent in the military, I'm, like, really hard on deadlines. I never wanna be late for anything. I'd rather be
Oh, yeah.
early for stuff, and
Oh,
so
yeah.
I try to get things done early, and then I'll just revise, revise, revise till I think it's solid and tight and at the word count and formatting's
Mhm.
right, I don't I think that helps. I've had a bunch of now projects because of that. Um,
Yeah, that's and
yeah,
it's just so important to make deadlines. Uh when you're writing for someone else.
yeah,
Now, I've had plenty of projects where I was writing for myself and I haven't finished them ever because
yeah,
I don't have a deadline. And
yeah,
it's a big motivating force. I
yeah,
think
no, I agree.
the deadline stuff got really drilled into me early on when I started doing freelance because, in a lot of ways, I knew that other people were taking their time, and I was like, I want to be on time. I want to be the person, so I get more work.
Right.
Right? It becomes a so hopefully a self perpetuating.
Mhm. Well, I've benefited from it turning in stuff on time or early because then when other people couldn't whatever reason, couldn't complete on a project, So
There
working on
you
some
go.
hardcovers, I've now multiple times gotten to the opportunity to take over projects with a 2-week turnaround to do something,
Yeah,
and I've
yeah.
been able to do that. So hopefully that's helped my reputation. I don't know. With-
Probably has.
Yeah. Well, this has been enlightening, and I
Yeah.
apologize if I'm getting into the nitty gritty because I'm really interested in your process, and I think other people are as well.
You say I still don't feel like I have a process sometimes, to be honest.
Yeah,
But I do get things done. So I got to be doing something okay, if not right. Just to,
yeah.
so
I, th- I think you do more than okay.
thank you, John. I think you do more than okay too.
Well, this has been fun.
Yeah,
I'm
good.
John.
And I'm Jason, and this has been Digital Divination.